Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
In this episode, we will be discussing Marvel and Netflix new martial arts superhero show Iron Fist, viral horror hit Get Out, and we will be finding out what I thought of Nick's recommendation, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, later in the show. But before that, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, after a conversation with a colleague about how it's one of these things we've all known about but no one actually knows about, I decided to read The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft to, try and work out what Cthulhu is other than a line of sort of cuddly toys and tie-in merch. And yeah, it turns out it's quite scary. Who knew? It's not as cuddly as I'd previously thought. Obviously, I haven't read the whole Cthulhu mythos, which I gather, thanks mostly to a conversation with Alastair the other day, is a whole overarching theme tying a bunch of his stories together, whereas I just skipped to The Call of Cthulhu, which is apparently one of the few stories that's actually about that specific character. But yeah, scary, if slightly racist. It's probably not a huge revelation to discover that H.P. Lovecraft, as well as being a scary writer, is also slightly racist. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah, obviously he is pretty racist, which is I think they're kind of
obviously he's pretty racist.
Well, yeah, it's
the hallmark of any great writer.
If you read like sort of large number, or any quantity of H.P. Lovecraft stuff, you become apparent quite quickly that he is pretty racist. But the Cthulhu mythos is kind of woven throughout all of his short stories. Like, I think Cthulhu is mentioned in almost all of them, if not all of them. Things like the book the Necronomicon comes up in all of them, and various other things, like the old ones I think are mentioned in most of the short stories. So it's kind of like the mythos itself is woven through all of the short stories and the various things that reference Cthulhu. But that's the one that has like kind of the most explicit references to Cthulhu.
It doesn't feel like you're watching the series finale of a show you haven't seen or something. It's fairly straightforward sort of story about this guy slowly stumbling into the web of this mysterious ancient beastie thing.
Is that one of the ones that mentions the town of Arkham?
I don't think so. He goes... It's just about a guy investigating a bunch of letters he's been left or something, and then he stumbles upon the story of this sailor who talks about how he met Cthulhu on an island, and it's just a bit weird. And there's some cult stuff as well. Yeah,
there's pretty much always a cult in any H.P. Lovecraft story. A lot of them take place in the town of Arkham in New England, which is like a fictional town. They pretty much all take place in, which is where Arkham Asylum in the Batman comics comes from, I believe.
Yeah, probably.
I'm 90% sure that is exactly why it's called Arkham Asylum.
Yeah, it does sound like something they do, the old Batman comics, especially. Yeah, I gather most of H.P. Lovecraft stuff is public domain now, so they can pretty much do what they want. I got it on Kindle for free. There's a bunch of like complete H.P. Lovecraft books, which are just basically all the public domain stuff pasted together.
There's always been a rumor that Guillermo del Toro, famed for Pacific Rim and also famed for The Devil's Backbone and things like that. There's a rumor that for a long time he's been working on a film adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. Because Lovecraft never wrote a novel, but he did write one novella.
Yeah.
So apparently there's supposed to be a film adaptation of that in the works.
It seems like it's the sort of thing where if he did ever do it, we'd probably cover it on this podcast.
Yep.
So what have you been experiencing since the last episode?
Well, I've gone down to the Prince Charles Cinema. I was watching the Darjeeling Limited, Wes Anderson's film about a group of brothers trying to reconnect whilst on a train through India. The Prince Charles Cinema has a Wes Anderson retrospective going on right now. So they're showing pretty much all of his films, which by the time this comes out, I don't know if it's finished, actually. But yeah, they were showing like a lot of the classics, like the Royal Tenenbaums, like Rushmore, Life Aquatic, quite a lot of them. But yeah, I went down to see the Darjeeling Limited. It's a really good, like, sort of comedy, slightly surreal in Wes Anderson's kind of really, really sort of surreal taken comedy, starring his usual players, Owen Wilson, Jason Schwartzman, also Adrian Brody in this one. Yeah, and it's basically a group of brothers who meet up after the death of their father to reconnect on a spiritual journey through India on the Darjeeling train. It's got all the hallmarks of classic Wes Anderson. It's got the odd camera angles. It's got the comedy repeating dialogue. It's got the sort of like slightly surreal edge. It's a film that I think I first saw it when it originally came out, and I've seen it a few times since. But I think this is the first time I've seen it since it was originally released on the big screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the only Wes Anderson film I've seen is The Life Aquatic, which was pretty fun. It was a long time ago, so my memory of it's pretty spotty. But
yeah. No, he's good. That's I think almost all of his films, apart from possibly the first one, have Bill Murray in them somewhere. And I think The Life Aquatic is the only one which has like Bill Murray playing the main character.
So Bill Murray pops up in the Darjeeling Limited somewhere then?
He only appears in the very I think in the very first scene.
Yeah.
The film opens with Bill Murray in a taxi racing to the station to get on the train. Then he kind of runs to get on the train, but doesn't make it. And then as he's like kind of falling over, dropping his suitcase, Adrian Brody runs past him and jumps just on the train and just makes it. And then it kind of, picks up from there. And then he kind of makes his way to his cabin where Owen Wilson and Jason Schwartzman are waiting for him. And it kind of, I think Bill Murray appears like, there's a weird sort of montage bit later on where like they go through kind of like different carriages of the train. And I think Bill Murray is like kind of in there again.
Yeah.
He just basically kind of does one style of filmmaking, which he does very well. He's kind of got a very idiosyncratic style, which people either love or find a bit tiresome after the first couple. We might revisit some on the podcast at some point.
Okay, and first up today we're looking at Marvel's Iron Fist, the latest in the sort of Marvel Netflix Defenders sequence, starring Finn Jones as Danny Rand, a young man who returns to New York after being missing for, I think, 15 years, having disappeared in a plane crash as a child, being thought dead. It turns out he's not dead. He's been living with monks, learning to become the ultimate martial arts weapon in the battle against the Hand. As you do. So yes, he's now the Iron Fist, and he meets some people and fights some people, and there's a whole series. It's based on the 70s comic series of the same name, which has drawn some attention for being, as with a lot of these 70s things, well, 60s, 70s things, slightly culturally appropriative, in that Danny is obviously, the white man who goes to the Eastern culture and becomes best at it. So there was, I think, an active campaign to have him cast as an Asian American actor rather than a white actor, which didn't succeed. And yes, the show came out on Netflix a few weeks back. We've seen the first half or so of the series. Alastair, what did you think?
Painfully average, I would say. That's my Cliff Notes version.
That is about right, yeah.
Yeah, it's not terrible. It's not like the worst thing's ever been committed to film, but that's damning with faint praise. I don't know, it's just really, really superhero TV show by numbers. There's a guy, he has some backstory, he has some abilities, he fights some evil people. That's kind of it. And that's sort of drawn out.
Yeah, the fact that it was sort of alright, not alright, I don't know. The fact that it was quite mediocrely, and to be honest, on the low end of mediocre, did, I think, lead to some quite incredibly bad reviews with a degree of, like, Schadenfreude, I think. There was an extent to which, Doctor Strange came out at the end of last year and was a bit culturally problematic in roughly the same way, in the sort of the white saviour way I mentioned. But people couldn't really turn the full guns on that because it was alright, it was fine, it was competently made to at least an entertaining degree, whereas this, unfortunately, is kind of a bit bleh. So, yeah, it's duly got the full rage, and I can't really defend it that much, because it's a bit nothingy, to be honest. I don't know, the showrunner of this is Scott Buck, the guy who showran the last few years of Dexter, which were terrible, like properly terrible. I'm not going to do the Dexter rant here, because this podcast would go on for about an hour too long. But the last few series of Dexter were an amazing exercise in taking something that was doing sort of okay and flushing it down the toilet. I'm sure there were mitigating factors. You do get the feeling with Dexter that the network just didn't want it to end. But he has not redeemed himself with this. This is sort of, after the first 3 Netflix shows, which they weren't universally amazing, they did all seem to be trying to do something. This is not trying to do anything, it's just so flat.
Yeah, I think Doctor Strange pulled it back because it had really, really good visuals, and also it came on the back of a lot of quite bad superhero films in the last year, like X-Men Apocalypse or Batman vs Superman or Suicide Squad. And I think the fact that this isn't total garbage actually kind of carried it.
I don't know. I don't want to damn Doctor Strange with too much faint praise. It was good. It was fun. It was fine. It wasn't changed my life amazing, but it was a perfectly decent superhero film, and this does not even trouble the level of perfectly decent, to be honest.
Also, it's there's the fact that like Iron Fist has to be compared to like Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and like some really, really good TV shows.
The thing is, part of me feels like the Netflix shows have been sort of teetering on the edge of a big failure for a while. Like, they all have, the other three all have some really amazing stuff, and especially Luke Cage and Daredevil. They have some amazing stuff and some quite sort of boring stuff. The pacing they seem to have adopted is very, very slow, and it relies really heavily on execution redeeming it. Like, people going, well, the pacing's incredibly slow, but there's some amazing acting, or there's these amazing dialogue scenes, or there were these amazing bits. And the other three do manage to put it back by having these amazing bits, just about. I mean, Daredevil's a bit boring at times, and Luke Cage was a bit boring in its second half. This lacks the amazing bits. It's just quite slow.
The writing is just a bit dull, and the plot's a bit dull, and like it's not really going anywhere particularly interesting. I don't know if it pulls it back in like the later episodes, but like for a show in which like there's a guy who's really good at martial arts and fights people, it's probably not a good sign that like one of my main notes is that it's quite dull. It's not saved by the fact that it kind of really gets bogged down in basically kind of ongoing ninja conspiracy, which was like my least favourite part of Daredevil.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of back, but with more. It's almost as if like someone watched Daredevil and goes like, do you know what people really liked? The ninja stuff. Should we do a show that's entirely based around that? And everyone's like, no, that wasn't what we liked about Daredevil.
No. I mean, the Hand, the ninja cult conspiracy, whatever they are. I'm pretty sure my main note on them when we did Daredevil Season 2 was the Hand. Boring in comics, boring on TV, and I stand by that note. They're boring, sorry. Although I am interested to see the Defenders, and because, I like all the main characters and I want to see them teaming up, I can't say I'm massively excited to see them fight the Hand, to be honest. I mean, the best way to handle the Hand, so to speak, is probably just to allow them to be boring and just focus on the characters interacting. And hopefully that's what they'll do, because the world does not need any deep insights into the Hand. They do not have the depths to explore. Yeah,
they're just a group of shadowy ninjas up to evil things. They're very much like a faceless villain with, kind of no real purpose. They're kind of, again, evil for the sake of evil. It's never really gone into like what their deal is, other than the fact they're just like, in this one, for some reason they want to like sell heroin into New York a lot, which it doesn't seem to like
sell heroin a lot, as you do. And as I say, a lot of it's just hanging this sort of shit villain off this sort of premium telly framework. It's like there's all this space in the show. There is so much space in the show where an in-depth characterization of the villain should clearly be plugged, except the villain they're using has no character. So instead it's just talking.
Well, what they're planning on doing is trying to like go into like the backstory of Danny Rand and his relationship with, he's like his parents were like founded some company that's sort of a bit vague about what it actually does, other than kind of everything. But so his parents founded this big company, and then like now he's trying to like work his way back into it with his like kind of his childhood friends are like now running it, which and that's supposed to like, I guess, like fill the majority of that characterization in the story, but it's just kind of, again, a bit dull and a bit tedious.
I don't know, for every one scene where there's little Danny trying to fit into this company and being sort of childishly naive and it's sort of charming, there's another 5 or 6 scenes of it's kind of dull. I think I've watched up to episode 7 and there's like a 3 or 4 episode plotline based around Danny saying something a bit too nice to a reporter. And it's just like, I mean, this is not an invalid plot to do with this character, but why has it taken so long? Why is this a third of your series? What are you doing?
Yeah, I think you've sort of hit on the fact that like the whole show moves like really slowly. It's like the second episode, sort of takes place entirely in some kind of mental health institution, which like most other shows would move past like much faster.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help. I watched that episode about a day after I watched the episode of Legion that did the same thing. That was a lot better.
Yeah.
Spoilers, we're going to cover the second half of Legion at some point. It's going to, unless the last episode completely shits the bed, it's going to get a much better review.
Yeah.
But yeah, Iron Fist, the first 2 episodes to give it its credit, I've now slagged it off so much, I feel like I should say something vaguely positive. The first 2 episodes are the low point. It does slightly pick up after the first 2 episodes, where it basically tries to drag 2 hours of drama out of the lead character reclaiming his identity and proving that he's Danny Rand, even though that obviously needs to happen for the show to get going, so it's obviously going to happen. So you just end up sitting there going, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm finished.
I know, it does have some like good bits in it. Like the character of like his sort of adopted sister is like an interesting character, and she's got, so there's some quite good bits when she's like not sure if he's the real Danny Rand or if he's, or kind of wants to believe it is, but like is refusing to let herself believe. There's another character of someone who runs a dojo.
Colleen Wing.
Yeah, and she's quite interesting.
Yeah, there are some good characters and some good ideas, which is why this is getting, a sort of this is punishingly mediocre review rather than this is like having shit rubbed in my eyes review. But a lot of these good ideas either aren't well executed, or the execution is so slow that it just robs it of a lot of what it would have had. The woman you mentioned, Joy Meacham, her brother has this sort of weird relationship with their father. This sort of weird, hateful, borderline abusive thing, which is actually quite interesting. There's some sort of interesting beats as he sort of struggles with his love-hate relationship with this man. But again, it's so spread out that you sort of just end up throwing your drinking straw at the screen, shouting, "Get on with it! Come on, do something."
And then also, like, whenever there's like a payoff, it seems to kind of like be like over and done like too quickly. When Danny meets the father, who I guess is supposed to be one like the principal villain, or at least like one of the villains, and he kind of just like, that's kind of resolved very, very quickly. And
the other problem is that a lot of the payoff takes the form of fight scenes, and the fight scenes, as you've sort of mentioned, I think, are a bit flat. And considering this is meant to be like the martial arts show, they really could have, I think, thrown more money onto the fight scenes. They're really not good enough for the show this is. I mean, how many episodes have you seen, Si?
5 episodes?
Yeah, in episode 6, there's a load of fight scenes, and they're shit.
Yeah.
That's my amazing insight. In the 6th episode, there's a bunch of fight scenes where he fights a bunch of sort of mid-level bosses, which is clearly meant to be the sort of the midway turning point of the show, and they're not very good. They're just kind of there. Yeah, and considering Daredevil wasn't even really about the martial arts in the same way, the fact that Matt Murdock, the lawyer, punched people was merely something he did. Was this, fighting's meant to be his thing. The fact that the fight scenes in this are nowhere near as good as Daredevil is a bit of a problem.
Yeah. That's one thing I would say is that, Daredevil had better fight scenes. And I've read some reviews that point to the fact that, like, there is the element that, like, Daredevil wore a mask, so they could have gotten, like, a stunt guy to do the fighting, which may be one of the reasons why it's a bit better. And Iron Fist doesn't wear a mask, so obviously, the guy who was the Knight of Flowers in Game of Thrones has to do all the fighting, like, himself. But it's not saved by the fact he lacks kind of charisma and personality.
Yeah, Finn Jones, I mean, obviously, he's just the guy doing the job, and it's not entirely his fault that Marvel have chosen to cast him, a white person, rather than the Asian American actor a lot of people wanted. But he doesn't redeem it with sheer charisma, unfortunately. Like, the other 3, like, Netflix Defenders Marvel leads are very charismatic and do a lot to carry their shows along. Finn Jones, although he isn't offensively bad, is just kind of there.
Yeah, I think there's also the fact that the others at least had like a touch of humour. Like, what this show is really lacking is someone like the Foggy role in Daredevil. Someone who at least like provides like a little bit of like humour and relief. Like, this is like an incredibly post-faced show. I mean, even like Jessica Jones had the running joke about how she keeps breaking the door to her office.
Yeah, the Jessica Jones was a lot of the comic relief in her own show with her sort of snippy wisecracks. I mean, it wasn't a comedy, but it gave her a bit of personality. Whereas Iron Fist, Danny Rand, is a very sort of flat, sincere character, and you could do that. I mean, Luke Cage and Matt Murdock are not quippy people, but they had someone to play the funny man to their straight man, whereas Iron Fist just has lots and lots of straight men, so to speak.
There's no relief. Like, no one who's particularly funny. There's no one who's like vaguely interesting. Like, everyone's kind of like pretty straightforward. Like, there's some people who are quite corporate and they run a company for a living. There's like, a woman who runs a dojo and she fights.
And she's good. Her fight scenes are better than Finn Jones's fight scenes. Yeah. Which is, again, another problem where a lot of the narrative of the show relies on this character being the number one martial arts man. And, like, you're not even the number one martial arts man in your own show, never mind the universe.
It's kind of made a bit worse when they introduce, I think in, like, the 5th episode, Claire, the character that, like, ties in all the other Defenders TV shows.
Yeah.
And it kind of, like, just highlights the fact that, like, well, A, she's kind of a crowbarred in a bit, and B, is kind of like, she has, like, a bit more personality and is sort of vaguely interesting, which just serves to kind of underline the fact that, like, the show is largely made up of characters who are not particularly interesting and don't have much of a personality.
In the episodes I've seen, I think I've seen 7, there's the few episodes which have Claire Temple in them, as all Netflix shows must, and there's also a couple of episodes that have Carrie-Anne Moss's Jerry Hogarth character in. And in both cases, those characters do a lot to illuminate the scenes they're in, and when they inevitably sort of drift off, I'm a bit sort of, no, come back.
Yeah.
Don't leave me with these people. Yeah. I don't know, it's possible to rose-taint my view of, like, rose-taint? I don't know, rose-tinted glasses, I think is what I'm alluding to. My view of things like Daredevil. A lot of Daredevil is quite mediocre, as we covered in our review at the time. The last third of Series 2 of Daredevil is properly shit. But a lot of Daredevil is sort of hits this level of okay middlingness, and then there's usually, except for the shit bits, a few enough really good bits in most episodes to go, yes, that's why I watched this. And Iron Fist sort of ticks along at roughly the same level of okay-ish mediocrity, and instead of a few good bits in an episode, there's usually a few bits, usually it has to be said, involving the main character saying Zen martial arts sayings in a really cringy way that make me go, oh fuck off.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that someone like look at the this material and be like, yeah, we should base like a major character around this, because it doesn't seem to be like a lot there.
I don't know, you could do shit with anything. It needed someone with a bit more creative vision rather than what they've done here, which, and again, I don't like slagging individuals. I try not to slag individuals, but Scott Buck as a showrunner does not seem to be the visionary they needed to make gold out of this material.
No.
So it's sort of alright in the same way that a lot of Daredevil is sort of alright, and if you like the Defender shows, you'll probably get through it. I imagine I'll watch the rest, because once you get past the first 2 incredibly slow, stodgy episodes, it picks up at least a bit of momentum, but very rarely better than sort of alright. It's not a good show. Sorry.
I think one of the things about this show is that, like, it kind of feels like it needs to set up a lot of stuff for the Defenders crossover that's coming out later this year. It's my concern about that, is that, like, if the setup they're doing for that is setting up the Hand or developing the Hand in more detail, then that's like, well, they're not particularly interesting or good villains. So I know they've got Sigourney Weaver apparently is rumored to cast to play the principal villain. I don't know what her character will be like or what her role will be like, but that might, they've got someone, you know, who's good, so that might, you know, sort of make the crucial difference.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it turns out that basically the Defenders spares itself too much hand setup because Iron Fist has already done it, and basically this show is taking a shot to the face so that Defenders can be good, then, you know, maybe I'll thank them down the line. But at the moment, it's not very good. And also, if the I mean, I don't know. I'm getting into critiquing something I haven't actually seen, so I should probably keep this brief. But if the Hands are being thrown to Defenders, if this is just set up, they really could have introduced a villain who actually, you know, is Iron Fist's villain, so it feels like something actually matters. Well,
I assume that's where they're going with this character, the sort of adopted father.
Yeah. Anyway,
character who's supposed to be like, I guess he's going to be some kind of principal villain at some point.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have probably seen the entire show, so they will know whether we're talking shit or not. But in the first 7 episodes, yes, it does seem like the Daddy Meacham, the main Meacham person, is probably the closest we've got to an Iron Fist specific villain. And although his relationship with his son is sort of interesting, it's not save the show level interesting.
No, yeah, it's just like I say, it's just a bit dull. I don't think I would be watching this or recommending people to watch this if it wasn't like a Netflix Marvel adaptation. If it was just like, you know, it could easily sort of fade into the background of like another superhero show if it didn't have such pedigree.
Yeah, we're into completists only territory at this stage, I think. Hopefully Defenders will be better.
Next we'll be discussing Get Out, a new horror film written and directed by Jordan Peele and starring Daniel Kaluuya, Alison Williams and Bradley Whitford. Chris is off to the country to meet his girlfriend, Rose's parents, for the first time. Chris is worried because they don't know that he's black. What starts as some awkward interactions between white Americans and African Americans quickly escalates into something far creepier. This is a horror thriller without a large budget or a big marketing push. It hasn't been particularly widely marketed, but it has been something of a viral hit. I found out about it entirely through social media, but we went down to see it in the cinema recently. Nick, what did you think?
Yeah, this was great. Really good and strong. Another film from the occasionally referenced tight as fuck genre, I think. Everything was there for a reason. There were several good twists, which I see no reason to spoil, because I don't really have anything in depth to say about them other than, yes, they were good. There is something exciting and relevant feeling about a film that can talk about race in a meaningful, relevant way without feeling like an issue movie, I think. I went to see this with a few friends, and one of them was a bit sort of, is it an issue movie? And no, I think he came out agreeing it wasn't. I think it's a film about race, but isn't, lecturing you, and that's good. I think it's doing it in an exciting way. It's using comedy, which is always a good way to, get into these issues without it feeling like a lecture. And yes, it was grounded in the real world, but it's also, as I said, some of the twists, again, which I won't spoil, are a bit batshit. So yes, I really, really liked this. A strong 8 or 9 out of 10, I think. Good film. How about you?
If anyone remembers from a few years ago, there's that film Crash, not the David Cronenberg film from the 80s, the Sandra Bullock one, which was very much kind of like mainstream liberal America tries to confront race. A film in which characters sit around and have conversations about race that no human being would ever actually say to anyone else. Or if they did, it would only be in the context of like a really specific, me and you are going to talk about race right now. It just came across as like really clunky and really awkward, whereas Get Out tried to make it like, seamless. How it kind of like, again, got into this discussion into the awkwardness that white America has trying to talk to African Americans, like sort of the first half of the film, or also when like Chris is meeting his girlfriend's parents, and they're basically like rich white people who are very much like, don't worry, we're cool, we're liberal,
Yeah.
In a kind of really, really like earnest way.
Yeah, I saw someone post on Twitter. Yeah, the thing about Get Out is the villains on Get Out are exactly the sort of white people on Twitter saying, I really like Get Out. So what I'm saying is we like this film and we're terrible.
Yeah, it's reached that level of meta at this point. Yeah, so white people who don't really understand race, they're kind of like, they're not racist because like they don't feel like, well, they didn't vote for Trump, or they didn't like post like racist hate speech on Facebook, and they kind of feel they should be given like a big gold star for this when they don't actually like understand much about like race. And it's kind of like, a film populated by like those people trying to like awkwardly talk to a genuine African American on the same level without like kind of acknowledging this in any way.
Yeah, I mean, the main character, Chris, isn't, like, a deep or nuanced character with massive amounts of baggage in his past, but he doesn't need to be. The fact that he's just a guy who reacts exactly like a normal guy would to everything, obviously, is, part of the joke. All of the characters who are orbiting around him are a bit sort of, oh, it's a black guy, we need to react differently to him, and he's just, hi. Yeah. It's good. The comedy is, I think it's quite sort of peep showy, Curb Your Enthusiasm-y, sort of socially aware cringe comedy. And obviously, if that's not your sort of thing, then this film will probably make you want to die.
The general awkwardness is like throughout the film kind of plays into like the creepiness. So without wanting to spoil too much, like it is a horror film, and it's kind of like an escalating tension throughout, which plays off quite well the fact that like it starts with sort of slightly awkward social premise, or this sort of like kind of American cross-race dialogue, and like kind of the awkwardness kind of escalates to the point of like, this is awkward, this is weird, like you say, like kind of Curb Your Enthusiasm sort of style, to the point when it crosses over to like, no, actually this is actively creepy, these guys are not behaving like normal people, and then sort of escalating into like, we're ultimately into like outright horror.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the other thing that's good about it, is that the twist into horror, it doesn't feel like you're sitting there waiting for it, because obviously, it's a horror film. Much as we'd love to pretend, we all sit down to films in this sort of virginal state of, this could be anything. You sit down into the Get Out knowing it's a horror film and waiting for some horror.
Yeah.
And I don't think the twist into horror comes too late or too slow, or you're sitting there thinking, I know how this is going to turn horrific. When the big twist came, and again, being coy and not spoiling it, I didn't go, yeah, whatever, I knew that. Yeah, I felt the twist. I felt shock. It twisted at exactly the right moment when I started to think, hang on, there's something creepy about thing in the plot, and it worked. It was a very good, the audience is with the film twist, rather than the audience worked this out half an hour ago, get on with it.
Yeah, it's really handled well, how it escalates the tension throughout into the kind of like, this is weird, it's getting slightly weird, this is definitely stepped over a line, but it's kind of vaguely normal, into like something quite fucked up's going on.
Yeah,
and like I say, it works quite well off kind of the awkwardness, and so this vague sense of like, we're all liberal people, but we live out in the middle. Well, we live in the middle of nowhere, which is a great setup for any kind of like horror show.
Yeah,
combined with all of our friends are white and everyone we interact with is white, so they have no experience or knowledge of how like other people live their lives. I get the feeling they're not particularly helping in the struggle for racial equality or emancipation from racism, because like they kind of live in this like kind of white bubble, and it was like, well, everyone we know is quite nice, so like what's the problem? It's like, well, that's not really what the rest of the world is like. They kind of do a good job of incorporating that into the tension of the film and the horror of the films to make it all kind of make a point, but also like be pretty scary at times.
Yeah, I mean, this film seems to be chiming with the audience in a way that actually provided me with a slightly unusual cinema experience. There was a lot of, like, clapping, cheering and applauding when we saw this film in a standard cinema in East London. And, yeah, honestly, that's not something that happens to me, a reserved British person who sees films in London a lot. I mean, occasionally there's someone talking behind you, but that's not because they're invested with the film, that's because they're arseholes, bluntly.
Or they're quite bored with the film.
Yeah, but this was a very audience and film thing, and it's one of these things where it starts off slightly annoying you and then sort of, okay, no, this is a level of investment, this is going into the film. It was weird, it was different, but it wasn't entirely bad. I don't think it was definitely, this film is providing a level of catharsis and doing something.
It's strange to talk to like other people, because like I know other people who've gone to see the film and basically said that they've had like similar audience reactions.
Yeah,
for other people, so like it's not just the particular audience we were with that got especially vocal. Apparently, like, it doesn't even think this film, it really provokes people to be, maybe it's a London audience thing, I suppose, because I don't know, I haven't spoken to anyone outside the capital who has opinions on this film, but like, yeah, certainly, like, it seems to be a film that generally people seem to get really, like, het up and emotional about, or like screaming and shouting and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there has to be a sign that, it's tapped into something, this level of a normal black person dealing with well-meaning but clueless white people is not something that isn't standard, it's striking a chord. The fact that this film deals with it in a cathartic horror way is very much, hitting something. And, as someone who may well fall into the well-meaning but clueless white person category, that might occasionally be uncomfortable, but yeah, this film has clearly hit something.
Yeah. There's humour in it as well, it's not just all horror and stuff. The ending is quite humorous places and stuff, and like it's not like it kind of dissolves the tension; it counterbalances it quite well.
Well, no, it balances the humour quite well in that there's a combination of this sort of awkward Curb Your Enthusiasm stuff with the white family, and then there's also the lead character's friend who serves mainly to provide sort of amusing wisecracks and stuff and shouts hysterically about how ridiculous the situation is. And I think it provides a bit of a relief from the tension, the tense humour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. And the lead actor, Daniel Kaluuya, it's good to see him going from Britain to America, and like all good British actors nowadays, putting on an American accent and making it big in the States. He's been in Skins and Black Mirror over here, and now he's in one of the big films of the year. Daniel Kaluuya, going to be a star, I imagine.
Yeah, I hope this leads to more work for him. One of the other things that's interesting is it reminds me of Rosemary's Baby. Not in the way probably a lot of people are thinking, is that like...
I'm not thinking anything, I haven't seen it.
There's one thing that's got in common with, which I really liked about this film, is basically the main character, or some of the characters, at every point they make the right decision. Like, most horror films, you think there's a point where you're like, okay, this is creepy, so why don't you just like run away from the weird thing that's going on? Or like, I think we're talking about Black Mirror, so like, most of these things are kind of like stories that are like based on escalation. There comes a point when like the main character should be like, no, stop, I'm getting off the roundabout. And then you have to kind of meet that point when like you have to deal with the fact that what do you do at that point? Or do you just kind of gloss over it and pretend it never happened? But this film, I think, is does it really well in the fact that, like, in every case, Chris makes like the logical right decision, and like including the point when he does actually have a moment of like, no, this is weird, I'm going.
Yeah, he does spend a lot of the film trying to get out of the film, which is the believable reaction. So fair enough.
Yeah, there's usually a horror movie bit when it's like, oh, this is a bit weird. Like, should we wander down this like dark alley? And it's like, no, probably not. Based on the fact that loads of creepy stuff has happened. But, in this, like I say, at every point, I think Chris makes a kind of a logical, sensible decision. But, like, circumstances escalate around him. And the only other horror movie which I think really captures that is Rosemary's Baby. When, like, at any point in Rosemary's Baby, Rosemary makes the sensible decision. All the other characters just say, you're being a hysterical woman, stop being hysterical, and don't do what you were going to do.
It's a difficult balance, because a lot of the reasons why Chris can't just run away at any point is sort of social pressure rather than because there's a massive wall in front of him. Yeah. And it can be hard to, pull that off, in that, it can feel quite manufactured. It can feel just sort of, well, that's kind of bullshit. He could have just run away. But as I say, the fact you are there with the film, when you are this situation of meeting the in-laws or whatever, meeting your girlfriend's family is quite relatable, so you do feel, okay, there's a reason he can't just leg it at the points where he could have just legged it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which again, like a film like Rosemary's Baby uses that like social pressure quite well to illustrate the reasons why people don't just kind of get out of the clearly creepy and bad situation.
Yeah, no, it's good. Bradley Whitford apparently now playing the baddie in another comedy horror after Cabin in the Woods. I guess this is his thing now.
He looks old as well.
Bradley Whitford is getting old, Alastair, because we too are getting old.
Yeah, and, The West Wing, it was like 18
20 years ago, yeah.
I was working hard at a New York job making dough, but it made me blue. One day I was crying a lot, and so I decided to move to West Covina, California. Brand new pals and new career. It happens to be where Josh lives, but that's not why I'm here.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
What? No, I'm not.
She's the crazy ex-girlfriend.
Okay, and lastly today, it's Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the quirky romantic comedy musical from the CW, starring Rachel Bloom, who I think also co-writes it, as Rebecca Bunch, a woman who is working... I could just read out the theme song, I'm not going to though. She has a high-powered lawyering job in New York. She is secretly miserable. She bumps into her ex-boyfriend, who talks about his amazing life in a small town in California, and she becomes a bit fixated on both him and the idea of this amazing stress-free life. So she leaves her New York job and moves there to try and live that life. And it's an odd story about a woman's burgeoning obsession and her, to be honest, her long, slow mental breakdown. I like this a lot. I like comedy songs, as we've said before, and there's at least 2 comedy songs in every episode of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and it's also got some interesting things to say about both mental health and romantic comedy tropes. Alastair, you have seen, I believe, a few episodes of this. What did you think?
Yeah, it's genuinely funny. Yeah, the first thing is, it is, funny, which is kind of the bar you have to clear, I guess, as a comedy or romantic comedy. It's the comedy songs that make it. What takes it from being what would have been a, I guess, fairly standard sitcom. I mean, I don't know, in my life, I've, watched quite a few sitcoms around, around exist, American sitcoms of varying degrees. And the one thing that makes this, unusually good is the comedy songs. Because there aren't many that actually break out into song at any point, especially writing their own songs and writing their own songs that are both valid songs but and funny. Obviously there was things like Glee, but Glee just kind of had other people's songs.
Yeah, well, Glee was what they call a jukebox musical, wasn't it? It was just singing relevant songs by other people.
Yeah. Well, this they actually wrote songs and stuff, and the songs are genuinely catchy. I think I watched the 3rd episode, and then I found myself the next couple of days just at work or just going my life, just kind of every so often go to myself going I have friends. I definitely have friends.
Which must have reassured your friends.
Again, you just need to check in every so often, verify that you definitely have friends. But yeah, that's the 2 things that kind of make it more than just kind of generic American sitcom number 2, 3, 4 is it has comedy songs, which is unusual, and also there is actually some nuance to the main character in the fact that this person has moved across America basically to stalk their ex, but there's actually more of a thing this person is generally seen to be suffering some kind of mental breakdown on multiple fronts. And there's enough of the first episode to point you in the direction that their life as it was a bit rubbish, and their mother is a nightmare.
Yeah,
but builds from there, and they drop hints throughout it. In the 3rd episode, they have kind of a flashback to when her parents got divorced and stuff, which is you kind of get the feeling that she's an only child. Her dad left her. Her mum kind of focused a lot of attention on her, and that hasn't been kind of good for her for the last 20 years, and it's taken its toll, and she's finally cracked. So yeah, so there's the dual aspect is what kind of makes this show better than something like Joey, which liked both.
Oh, at last, some hard criteria. Is it better than Joey?
That should be kind of the base level for American sitcoms. Is it better than the Joey spin-off?
It's interesting about saying it's a sitcom. I do sometimes wonder: is it a bit flabby at the 40-minute time? Could it be tightened down to half an hour? And the answer is kind of it probably could be. But the thing is, it would have to be the American half hour, which is actually 20 minutes, and I think it would be a bit rushed at 20 minutes.
I think they would struggle to get several songs in, because they get at least 2, sometimes 3 songs in an episode, which is pretty good going, because you need to have several major pivots Which is also kind of weird, because the thing about doing a song is that basically the plot does have to stop, and then the song happens, and then like the plot resumes, which is like, if you look at like an episode of a 20-minute sitcom, they kind of have basically about like 1 or 2 emotional pivots. To basically take that and drag it out basically means that like, well, okay, there's not going to be much else going on in this episode. And also, if you look at like most of those 20-minute American sitcoms, the good ones, the writing is incredibly tight.
Yeah.
So if you were basically like, okay, so we're going to stop and have like a song for a while, I can imagine the American sitcom would write to be like, no, in the next 3 minutes, I need to do about 8 things. So no, you can't. No space for songs. So yeah, I think it kind of has to be that length.
Yeah, I think it's probably what they've landed on. Yeah, as a compromise. I think, as I say, I think it could almost be tighter if it was half an hour, like a half-hour BBC sitcom. But the half-hour slot doesn't really exist in the US outside like HBO. So yeah, I guess this is what they've landed on. But no, it's the weird ambiguity of it that sort of keeps me coming back. I guess, like, obviously, the lead character, you're on her side because it's her show and you're shown everything from her perspective. But there's always the slight edge of, is this okay? You can sort of see why she's doing it, but is what she's doing okay? And then, of course, often by the end of the episode, she realises that what she's doing isn't okay, and then you feel sort of sad when she does as well. It's a balancing act, and they mostly pull it off quite nicely.
I will say one thing, so like, I didn't find myself like laughing like a huge amount. It wasn't kind of like laugh a minute. You know, something like Rick and Morty, I found myself laughing like a lot more. A lot more throughout. Like, I thought, you know, it's funny, but like, it's not kind of like joke a minute. There was one thing that kind of like did kind of grate a bit. Like, there's one joke that like basically they keep going back to the joke of people saying to her like, I moved here for Josh, and she would be like, no, it's not to do with Josh. It's like, it's all because of this. And like, they kind of like make it that's like kind of a comedy point that kind of gets reliably brought up, and it's a bit kind of like, I feel this joke has been done. Like, the thing about like,
that's the premise of the show, though, so you're kind of stuck with that.
It's kind of the premise of the show, but like the fact that they need to like underline it at least like twice an episode.
Is it added in the theme song?
And it's in the theme song. It's like, well, the theme song is good. Like, I like the weird animated theme song. That's good, but like trying to make like a major dramatic beat or comedy beat of each episode, the moment when someone's like, are you doing this because of Josh? And it's like, no, it's not. And like the kind of the self-denial is a bit kind of like, okay, like this is starting to wear thin. It'd be better if they just kind of ran with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess in the early episodes of these network shows, they do tend to have to restate the premise a bit to try and, you know, catch up anyone who's just tuned in because they've heard some good buzz or something. But,
yeah, I guess so.
But then again, I guess they've got the theme song for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the idea that there's some depth to it. Like, you know, the idea that she's fixated on Josh as this sort of embodiment of this perfect life she wishes she had. And the disconnect is, but a lot of the times when she and Josh actually talk, they don't have that much in common. They're not actually people who have the same touch points on the same level as each other. It's actually a bit weird and awkward.
Yeah.
I just like the fact that they've actually written it in that way, and it actually comes across. I think that's a degree of like good subtlety.
Obviously, yeah, because the whole thing, like, she's moved to like West Covina, which basically is like a bit of a rubbish place and stuff. And it's nice to have like a sitcom that isn't set basically in like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Let's Be Crazy and someone in like Chicago or, you know, like Atlanta. It's like, okay.
Well, yeah, the premise of the sitcom is that she's moved away from the place where they normally set sitcoms because it was too stressful.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I don't know if West Covina is actually a real place or like they kind of invent kind of generic small town America, but West Covina does feel like a place that has like personality. It seems like it could be like a real place.
Yeah.
Unlike Fictionville, USA. My favourite aspect of the show is her friend stroke massive enabler. Paula, yes. Yeah, she's like the best bit, basically, when she basically realised that like the main character is a bit unhinged, crossing over into like, oh, she's found someone who's like a bit more unhinged than she is, and also has decided like to get massively emotionally invested in her story. You get the fact that she moved to West Covina to be near this guy Josh, and you know, it would have kind of probably just like fizzled out if she hadn't met a friend who's like constantly like pushing her and like sometimes like creating circumstances when she can interact with Josh.
Yeah.
Is actually like, that's kind of one of the things that sustains it. You get the fans like, yeah, this Paula has like a really like tragic life, and what keeps her going is basically that, yeah, she's like really emotionally invested in someone else's life. She's my favourite character.
Yeah. The sort of the brief flashes to Paula's home life and her sort of weird relationship to her husband and kids, as she sort of basically ignores them in favour of Rebecca's weird love life, is quite funny, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, the weakest character is probably Greg, who, although he does get a lot of sort of good lines, is a bit of a obvious character, but he has his role, I guess.
He's the normal boyfriend. I like their neighbour.
Oh, Heather.
Yeah, who's like really, really painfully cool.
Yeah, she's good. I like the way they've actually used her kind of sparingly, because she is the sort of character who would probably get a bit tiring if she was in like every other scene, but because she isn't even in every episode, she's always quite good when she turns up.
Yeah, and like her new boss is kind of like, they've done a good job of writing like awkward comedy boss. Again, who knows the person who's like teetering the edge of a breakdown.
Yeah, but I've seen... Oh, you've already seen like the first 3 episodes, haven't you?
Yeah, yes, I saw the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, well, I'm up to episode 14, I think, 15. I was like 3 or 4 episodes from the end of the season, and yeah, all the characters obviously do get, progression and direction. The boss in particular, actually, Daryl, they do go into him quite a bit more as the series goes on.
Well, he's going through a divorce, isn't he? So I assume you find out more about that, yeah.
He gets some songs eventually. They're quite funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, the biggest criticism I'd have as somebody who's watched most of a season is that there is a bit of a sort of mid-series wheel spin. Like, we can't advance the plot too much, therefore we're just going to sort of do nothing. Which might be one reason why a lot of the supporting cast get more to do in the mid-series, while the lead character sort of rolls in place. Yeah. But yeah, now that I'm up to like the last 3 or 4 episodes, it has started moving forward a bit quicker again.
Yeah.
Now, it's just been renewed for a 3rd season, so I am gently curious how they're going to keep it going into 3 years. Maybe the odds is it'll turn shit, I don't know. But so far, it's been quite good.
Yeah, it's a good show. And obviously, there aren't many shows like... The main drama is like the internal psychology of a female character. Like, you've got plenty of shows like Breaking Bad, which is the internal psychology of a male character, as he, how does he respond to everything in his increasingly crazy life. But you don't get this so often with female characters. The other thing about this, it is kind of, it's weird, it's like, it's much more of a straightforward sitcom to the stuff I normally watch. I'm not usually like...
I mean, it's commenting on the sort of romantic comedy thing, and the extent that she's obviously doing these sort of massive contrivances that she's engineering to try and have her meet cute with this guy Josh. But I think the comment it's making on the genre is... Yeah. Is it just me, or is a lot of this stuff actually a bit weird? I mean,
yeah.
To pull back to a word of the title, is it in fact crazy? Is this actually normal? And it's sometimes a direction that sometimes strains a bit to pull up a new thing every week, but I think it is saying something interesting about its genre.
Yeah, it's like, there's something slightly meta going on, which makes it more than like kind of like the generic sitcom. Plus, it's got things like comedy songs, and it's got like the characters have some kind of like emotional depth to them.
And there's usually quite a good sketch in like the last 30 seconds of each episode for some
reason. One of my favourite things is like, the kind of credits joke for each episode, like, is generally something that's like a bit surreal, like, and usually quite funny. Like, in the first episode, there's a running thing in the second episode, I think, is when she's like, she doesn't understand what a vampire weekend is. And there's like a bit when like she's on an actual vampire weekend.
Yeah.
And then like in the third episode, there's a bit when she's like talking to her, like, her younger self. Which again, like, it's like there's no plot relevance to this, like why she'd have a conversation with like herself when she was like 9 or something like that. But yeah, it usually is like kind of the funniest bits and stuff, and they can kind of go like full comedy.
Yeah, it's a good, interesting show. Apparently the ratings are quite low, but the network seems to be behind it, since they've just renewed it again. So yeah, it's nice to see something like this getting a shot on mainstream television. I
think it's got like a small but like dedicated fan base. Like, listening to like other pop culture review podcasts, like there are people who really like it.
Yeah, I know they've covered it on Seriously. I see a lot of people talk about it on Twitter.
Yeah, I think it's mainly because like, again, they've got like a core group of characters who are quite well developed. Especially like Rebecca, the main character, has like quite a big like back history and like story and stuff, and also like, again, like Paula has like you get like again like whole things about like her life and what it's like, and why she would be like, he explains why she'd be really, really invested in Becca, because you always get the sense that like the comedy friend is always like you look at them and it's like, what is your life like? Do you just exist to like hang out with the person we're mainly interested in, to make like funny observations and things like that? Like, surely you have like, what do you do when that person's not around? And it was like, in this it was like, well, yeah, they have an awful grind and it's pretty bad.
I have friends. I definitely have friends. No one can say that I do not have friends. I have friends. I definitely have friends. Friends, friendly friends. Time to meet my friends.
Okay, so that was Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Alastair, what are we doing next episode?
Slight departure, or like almost complete departure, although continuing the theme of focusing on a central female character. My recommendation is the German film Run, Lola, Run.
Ah, okay.
I don't know if you've heard of it.
Is this an alternate timeline film? Yeah, okay. It sounds... I think I have heard of it, yeah.
The plot is she has like 20 minutes to come up with some insane sum of money to stop her boyfriend robbing a bank. and you see the same 20 minutes play out like 3 different ways, or 20 plus minutes. It's one of those like cult classics. So a weird film that loads of people got into because they're very much like, oh, this film is like really unusual, but like really, really good. So I hope you like it. Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please head over to iTunes and leave us a review, as it helps us spread the word about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to this episode, back episodes, bonus audio under the name Excessive Fantasy Violence, and read some short written pieces by Nick and myself.
Okay, and you can also follow us on Twitter as MFV Podcast, where we occasionally post or retweet our opinions about pop culture, and we're also on Facebook as Moderate Fantasy Violence. I think if you just search us, the purple logo will appear. Okay, I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on the internet at nickbryan.com, or follow me on Twitter, where you can see my opinions pre-retweet as @NickMB.
I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlastairJRBall, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. That's all we have time for this episode. Next episode, we'll have a special bonus one, interrupting the 2-week schedule, in which we'll have a special guest, PDT, the host of Rangers Pod, a Power Rangers podcast, and we will be, funnily enough, discussing the new Power Rangers film. After that, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back with another regular episode, and in that episode, we'll be discussing Ben Wheatley's new film, Free Fire. We'll also be finding out what we thought of the rest of Legion, and also we'll be discovering what Nick thought of Run, Lola, Run. Well, thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
And like kind of the awkwardness kind of escalates to the point.
Sorry, carry on.
My excellent point was ruined by hiccuping.